Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors. Leaders that you might have never heard of, but in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, decisions they made, and the lessons that they learned along the way.
Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast.
Remy, welcome to What Makes You Tick. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
And we also have Rich with us. Hey, Rich.
I've missed this.
I know we do.
We were just staying in the green room, right? So we've got some news from the pod for our lovely listeners, which is that Tolu is now a father.
An actual podfather. Yes, I am.
Actual pod father.
Congrats. That's incredible.
Thank you very much.
After now he's birthed a beautiful baby
Yeah.
boy.
Your life
So-
will forever change, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was super excited, and Remy and I had an awesome sort of pre-chat to talk about just generally like what's going on in the market and what Remy's been doing in his career. And I was like, we have to get him onto the podcast. So, and there's also a Jacob Warwick link, which is quite fun. So I'm really excited about this episode.
Me too. So, Remy, what is it that makes you tick?
What a great question. Open-ended, nothing like not being specific. What makes me tick? I think from a career perspective, from a personal perspective, from both, what
All of the above.
Yeah, all the above. I think for me, what I value is freedom above anything else. Freedom. That's why I do what I do. I want to be able to do what I want and when I want, with who I want, how I want, where I want. That drives everything I do. Freedom and independence, right? So, very American, right?
I was going to say that's America to the core.
Yeah, it really does drive me. And I think from a work perspective, it's doing interesting work. And what I mean by that is that it needs to stimulate me intellectually, needs to keep me challenged, not get bored, but it also needs to be meaningful. And I think as I age gracefully, of course, I get more and more interested in the why behind what I do, what a company does. So I just, for me, I just don't want to go sell widgets anymore. I want to be part of something that has real meaning. And that could be, disrupting an old industry, could be helping people in whatever variety of forms, but those things professionally and personally are what really drives me. Yeah. And I wouldn't lie if I didn't say novelty a little bit. Like I like adventure in my life, right? Life is short and it's too short to be unexciting, right? Have some fun. And I think in the business world, especially these times, fun has really like become this very, I wouldn't even say secondary, I just want to say tertiary, as far as where it ranks. And I think novelty and adventure and fun has a big part to play in for me and whatever it is I do.
And if we just think back a little bit, where was it that you really realized that actually that freedom is really important to you, that the interest and the novelty is really important to you? Is there something that sticks out for you in terms of where you really realized?
Yeah, that's a really good question, just because I think for the last couple of years, I've been on a pretty deep introspective journey. Everybody went through it with COVID. I sort of got busy during COVID and tried to stay busy. So for me, it's happened, maybe I'm just a little slow, late to the party. But I've been on this journey for about a year and a half, and done a lot of introspective work. And so to answer your question, I always knew in the back of my mind that I don't like being, I don't like too many, I don't like shackles. I don't like being restricted. But I've become very, very cognizant of it in the last year and a half, where I've written these things down. I've started journaling, which really helps clarify. I used to think that was stupid. Why journal? I just, it's all up here. It's good enough. So having journaling things have really helped me clarify those thoughts and freedom, independence, adventure, novelty. These are values that I'm really, really, really exceptionally clear on now.
Hmm. Hmm. And what kind of changes has that meant that you've had to make about the life that you live and the things that you're focusing on?
Yeah. I think it's, from a professional standpoint, it's not just about taking any role, for for the money, right? The money's really, really good. I've learned that only lasts for so long, regardless of how much you make. It only lasts for so long. It's only an excuse for so long. I think in my personal life, it's meant, and I've got a 9-year-old son, and he's, you'll find this out very soon with, it's not just about you anymore. You're you're a leader, you're the example. And so you really have to live, um, I don't know, Aristotle called it a virtuous life. I don't know if I'd call it that, but you need to be the leader, and you really need to be self-aware, exceptionally self-aware as a leader. And I've taken that to heart in terms of really understanding what excites me, what annoys me, et cetera, motivates me, things like that. Become really, really self-aware. And so it just means, trying to be just living um just living to your true self, really. Understanding that and then living to it. And it's really values based, right? It's it's not, emotions get the better of us, and emotions come and emotions go, happiness, sadness, it's all here today, gone tomorrow. But it's really about staying true to your values. And so that is something that I live more now than I ever have before.
Yeah, I think you're so right because, as Rich said, I've just had a child, right? So when I'm just looking at this little baby, I'm just like, I just want him to have the best life, right? And I think it is that thing of when you're living not in line with your values, you might not have that freedom, you might not have that novelty. It chips away at you. It does something on the inside. And I think you're so right. I want him to know that it's good to explore, good to adventure, good to find new things, as long as it's in line with your values. Yeah, absolutely. It's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. 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 And it's, people say it's the hardest job in the world. I remember, I remember going, yeah, sure it is. Yeah, whatever. Like, it's the hardest job in the world. And then, you're in fatherhood, and it's like,
This
holy
is the
fuck,
hardest thing
this
in the
is really
world.
hard. This is really hard, man. Unrelenting and unforgiving some days, but it's priceless. Like, it's
Mm,
just, you wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change
right.
it for the world,
Mm,
even with all those ups and downs. But yeah,
mm.
it is tough. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd love to have a little bit of a whistle stop tour of your career, and if you could just like take us through really quick, but tell us some of the things about those places that really stuck out for you and really made you the person that you are now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so many of them stick out because I chose not to take the road. Um, I chose to take the road less traveled, right? That was on purpose. I didn't want easy. I wanted hard. And that that's what I got.
That's where you got.
So, it's and not everything's a success, right? I mean, I'm like everyone. There are still times where I look at what I've done and I'm like, that's nothing compared to what Jeff Bezos has done, or that's nothing, to what,
Yeah,
Steve Jobs has done. I'm this. So, we all suffer from that sort of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I think moving from Toronto to New York was a big move. I wasn't sponsored by a company. I had to handle all of that myself, and that was very stressful. Like, I really did. I had to be my own attorney, and I had to find ways to get it done. And there were, so add to the pressure of moving to a new country, being a salesperson. So you don't make quota. It's not like you can just, there was a lot on the line. And I'm glad I did that early, in my 20s, where, um, yeah, I chose hard and I was under additional pressure, and I could still perform. And, that was a great story, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
joined that company, and We did what we're on now, video conferencing technology, but back
Wow.
then, of course, it was much
It was
different.
new.
It wasn't, it wasn't done over the internet because there was no quality of service on the internet. So they did it over these big data pipes, right? Called ISDN, which I think stands for Integrated Switch Digital Network. I'm pretty sure after a long time that's been burned in my brain, but these big data cables and only the biggest companies think, Fortune 250, Fortune 500 can do it because it was incredibly expensive. The technology was expensive. The hardware was expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I remember we hosted a call with Chase and Jamie Dimon, and he had all his direct reports from around the world and their extended teams dialing in for this day-long call. And just the call it the toll charges was over $100,000 for that call.
Wow.
Right. Now, people are on Zoom
Yeah,
and
just for fun.
it's right. Other than the internet connection and the cost of the hardware, which is, laptop, very, very
Yeah.
little. So it's interesting how I've seen that technology evolve over time to become just incredibly like democratized.
Yeah, it's
Right.
accessible.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
it's it's a great example, but back then, we were selling the gear, selling the services, and we went from, close to 0 to 23 million within 4.5 years, and I really enjoyed that ride. I was selling in the Northeast. I ended up getting promoted to, a VP of sales and managing a team of 6 to 8, contributors, and it was and we had, we were still doing those big incentive trips. I don't even know if they do those anymore, but we're going to places like Grand Cayman and Portugal and other areas like that. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I just love this place. I just love it.
You don't see those trips anymore. We used to do that in our company. We had top performers conferences. It was like
Yeah.
every quarter in your appraisal, you could get a credit towards a trip. And we spent going all around the world, like to Marrakesh and to the pyramids of Egypt. It was the best thing in the world. I've actually just done a consulting project with a friend of mine's company, and they're like a £6 million company looking to sort of bring in some OKRs and KPIs. And I was like, look, this is one of the options that you could choose, and they're considering it. And I was like, I haven't discussed this idea with anyone for about 8 years.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
almost died out, I think, as a concept, but it's definitely, if I
Yeah.
was a founder now, I'd totally be bringing that back.
I think if companies aren't doing it, and I don't hear about many doing it at all anymore, it was just such a privilege. And you talk about engagement, like it just like people lived for those trips. I mean, for some people, they would, we went to Maui one year and we extended it a week. So we were in Maui for 2 weeks, and the first week was on a company dime. So that was our winter vacation. It was unreal. Yeah,
Yeah.
unreal. Really good time. Yeah, I agree. If I'm a founder, I'm all over that for sure.
I'm curious, right? You sort of went from, I've been a salesperson, we grew to 23 million, then I became VP. Talk us through that journey to become a VP.
Yeah, that's a good story too. So, and I still think this exists today, although I think it is getting better. When you're a high performing sales rep, that's the natural evolution, is for you to be a sales leader. No one told me how different it was. No one told me that I actually would have to give a shit about these other people and I'd be a high priced babysitter, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm joking, but
Yeah.
the skill set required to be a leader, to be a manager, is far, far different than what it takes to be an individual contributor. And I always found those words very, leader, individual contributor. They couldn't be more
Mm.
different, right?
Mm.
And I think there was an assumption that because you were a very good salesperson, you'd be a very good sales leader. And that's wrong. That's wrong. I was in that role for 9 months, and I went back to my boss and I said, "Fuck this. I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore." And he said, "You want to sell again?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Great. Here you go." So I went and sold. It was tough at the time because I felt like a failure, right? I felt like this isn't what I'm supposed to do. This is where I'm supposed to be. and I shouldn't want to sell, and I should want to be a VP, and I had no interest in it. And so, I was lucky enough that I had a position still at the company to be able to go back and sell, which is, great because you're a great performer. They want you. They're not going to say no. Um, but yeah, I felt like failure. And so it made me think hard about leadership, and it made me think really hard about how people in those roles aren't really supported very well. And there's no, you don't have a career counselor at the company saying, helping you decide, is this something you're supposed to? So I realize sometimes the best promotion is the one you don't take.
Really interesting. I did a podcast last week with a really good guy called Heath Barnett, and it was like what happens after you become a VP is that there's no more support, like, and very little for managers. There's like a statistic from a guy we had on the podcast who wrote this Team Lead Succeed book, Nick Fewing. It's like a team psychologist expert. And he said that 82% of managers are accidental. So they get absolutely no training at all, which you are, probably part of, right? We hate it because we're failing after being so good at being successful. But like after you reach VP, there's really no shade anymore. You're just expected to know all the answers. And when companies are hiring in senior leaders like you now into businesses, they kind of just expect that you've got it all down, but you've had to learn all that stuff. And it's not just skills. I've acquired some skills. I've read a couple of books. I've got it. There's like a whole, like you say, reframe in terms of what your role is and what value means to you. I was wondering when I'm talking about that, what's coming to mind.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're right. You're right, Richard. I mean, it's the mind shift is bigger than anything else. You need, and I could never, and I remember the SVP that I reported to saying, you really need to give up some of these accounts that you're still managing directly. He's like, I don't know how you're doing it. I don't know how you're managing team and you're managing these accounts. And it felt uncomfortable to let them go. It felt like I wasn't working. And so, and to your point, and I unfortunately, you hear a lot of stories like this today where, yeah, you get put into these roles and people just assume that you know what the hell you're doing. You don't. You really don't. You don't. And it's a shame because a lot of people's careers are on the line. And I think, I think it's a shame because I think some companies just play extremely cavalier with people's careers by doing that. There needs to be a better way of promoting people to make sure that they're ready. And I do think we're further ahead today than we were when I first did it, but I don't think it's exponentially improved.
No. No, I think that's really fair because whether it's sales or outside of sales, it's the same thing. If you're good technically, you can perform, you get promoted into leadership, but it's such a different skill set. It's just so different, and we're not trained well enough on some of those human skills, right,
Yeah.
to actually get the job done. One of the things that I wanted to understand from you is that it takes a lot of humility to be willing to go quote unquote backwards, from that VP role to then being an IC. And that feeling that you mentioned about feeling like you've failed, how did you navigate that? And even just some of the things that you might not think about, like, well, I was their boss before and now I'm back in the sales team with them. How did you navigate those kind of feelings and that feeling of failure?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was really torn. I probably stayed in that job a few months longer than I should have
Uh,
because it was a little bit humiliating for me. And I did feel like I was going backwards. I was lucky enough to have some people that I could openly speak with about it and say, look, this is how I'm feeling. Um, what do you think? Right. And they just encouraged me to put the title and the ego aside and go back and do what I wanted to do. And that's not always easy, right? So I had to just swallow my pride and say, look, and just be honest with myself and say, I'm just not enjoying this. Like life
mm.
has become exponentially more shitty for me since taking this role on. So do I want to be happy or
Yeah.
do I want to look good?
Mm.
And it just came to a point where I just couldn't stomach it anymore. And I just said, well, this is really what I want to do.
I think there's maybe a lesson here for people listening, right? Because I would imagine that there's a lot of revenue leaders, and you will have definitely had this since. I definitely have, which is you've got a top performer in your team, and they desperately want to get promoted, and they're coming to you going, "Hey, I really want to get that role. I want to take your job or whatever." But they've got a very clear progression in their mind, and they fight really hard for it. And like when you're a top seller, you have that competitive spirit, you have the goal, you will do whatever it takes. And often there's an arrogance and a sort of blindness to just they will sacrifice everything to achieve that goal. If you're the leader today and you've got that person in your team, that Remy at 20 something, how are you dealing with that scenario to help Remy to make the right choice?
Yeah, I think that's where the coaching comes in, right? And understanding if someone's really really pushing to get promoted, I'm having conversations with them in terms of why, right? Do they really understand what the role's about, the day-to-day, the tactical field level, hand-to-hand combat stuff that, because everyone talks about the sexy stuff, the strategy and all that good stuff. But do they really understand that? So it's got to be, look, why do you want to do this? And if you're not hearing the right reasons, then you have to dig into that. But I think as a leader, I think it's your responsibility, and I took this serious, my responsibility to say, like, okay, you want this promotion, but now let's talk about why. Like, what's driving that? What do you think this role's about? What do you think you'd be doing on a day-to-day basis? What do you think you might like? What do you think you might not like? And start getting into that with them and really find out if they're ready or not. It's not that and they could not be ready at that moment. Doesn't mean that they'll never be ready, but I think you need to have the right why, the right motivations to move into that. And if you don't, then yeah, I think your coach is doing you a favor by sort of almost selling you off it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't hear about those conversations all the time. It's more like, well, um, Sally wants to get promoted. Isn't that awesome? It's like, well, maybe.
Yeah.
Like,
Should be. Maybe not.
why does Sally want to get promoted? Because she likes to sit in, forecasting calls all day. Because or review budgets. I don't know. Like, is that really what you want to do? So yeah, finding out somebody's why is, I think, really critical. And I think that's where the leader has an obligation to that person to really try to understand that and help them, help guide them.
What are some of the things that over the years, when you look back at, you when you first took that leadership role versus you as a leader now, what are some of the things that you really had to grow in and that you've had to develop yourself in over that time?
Patience, patience. Yeah, did not have a lot of patience when I was in my early days, honestly. And someone told me once, they said, you know, um, be hard on results, but easy on people.
Hmm.
And I'm like,
Wow.
that sounds really nice, but I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Aren't these two like directly related to each other? What does that mean? So they explained it, look, just think about someone who's, trying really hard. They're putting in the effort, but they're not seeing the results. Right? Does that mean they're a bad employee? Does that mean they're a bad salesperson? Not necessarily. So, sit with them, peel back the onion, figure out what's going on with them, figure out where the friction's occurring in the process and then like manage to that versus, just being impatient with the results, being impatient with the person. I think there's sometimes an assumption there that people aren't trying as hard as they can. There's an assumption that they should have it figured all out. And, no, they don't. And so as I've developed as a leader, I've become way, way more understanding with people. Life happens. You can't, you all the best laid plans are sometimes laid to waste because life just says, we're not going to do that today. We're going to go this way instead. And, that comes out of nowhere. So I'm much, much more empathetic, as a leader than I was back then. And I think it's definitely served me far, far better by being much more empathetic. It doesn't mean that you let people off the hook. It doesn't mean that you don't, set clear expectations, mutually, that you don't expect people to, um, try their best. But I think life shit happens. And you gotta realize that, like everyone, they have good days and they have bad days, and that has to have a place in that formula.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. It makes me think about there was two like very prominent leaders in a company I worked at, and one when things were going bad made you feel this small, and another one attacked the problem and attacked the behavior or the result, but it was very much but you were made to feel big so you could overcome any challenge. And I remember like the distinct difference in terms of it could be exactly the same thing, but they would get both of these different people's reactions to it. And
Yeah.
one I would just walk away feeling invincible and it'd make the problems feel small. And another one you just literally were just destroyed and it killed a lot of people. A lot of
Yeah.
people couldn't cope with it. And it was
Yeah.
like, well, they can't hack it. And I'm like, this is leadership, because you don't want to, like you say, minimize problems. We're here to generate value. We're here to generate results. We have to step up. Often the role of a leader is to get people to realize they're not doing what they could be doing. They're not delivering their potential. They're not seeing the problem in the way that they should be seeing it. But it just made me think of that thing where, mate, I don't know whether you, when you say that you weren't patient, did you make people feel small? Was that some feedback that you had, or did you have examples where managers made you feel small, or was that like not, is that not relevant?
Look, I think, if you're overly focused on the results and the number, I think it's just a natural byproduct that people are gonna feel small. I really do. I mean, that's been my experience anyways, where you're just so focused on the number and, why aren't we hitting that? And not working with them to try to figure it out and as much as you should be. I think just, it's not always about what you say or do. Sometimes it's just as much about what you don't say or don't do. People start to question themselves. They feel small. And so, yeah, there were, I think I'm humble enough to admit that I had a lot of bad moments as a leader, as an early leader that I would look at today and just go, oof, oof, oof. That's what were you thinking there, buddy? Like that's pretty bad. So, but you grow and if you want to get better, then you take it upon yourself to be better. You got to leave the ego at the door. And I'm been lucky enough to been blessed with a natural curiosity where I'm just constantly I life would be really, really boring for me if I couldn't learn. And so, I read a lot and I'm not just about sales books too, I read philosophy, I love all that stuff because I think a lot of those folks, 3,000 years ago, Epicurus and, Stoicism and Aristotle, they've known what we're still trying to figure out thousands and thousands of years ago. And I think it has a place in life and business is part of life. And so for me, it was, learning more about them, learning more about myself, dropping my ego, just being naturally curious all the time has served me very, very well.
Mm.
And the
So,
people who reported to me
this is it. This is it.
eventually.
The other thing it made me think of it is founders, right? So you are now a senior revenue leader. I know we'll catch up in terms of your career story, but a lot of the time people get like this job, no, this title of CEO because they've built a wicked product, you know, and they've got some people to buy it. And I'm not under like, make diminishing how blooming hard it is and how brave they are, but they have probably come from a product background and never had to manage a large team, recruit, fire, deal with these sorts of problems, go through that really tough journey to become a leader. And so the way that they run their business and manage their direct reports, who are often senior leaders, can really lack that empathy sometimes. And it can, like you say, sort of make the person feel small just because they're so focused on, well, the business, you are a cost to this business, a massive cost. And we've got this massive goal that we've got, and we've got these shareholder expectations. And I wonder, it just makes me think, having had the opportunity to speak to someone like you who is working with some founders who are playing at a really high level, who might be more on the technical side. How have you found that way to work with them to help them to maybe identify some of the gaps that might be causing some challenge in the business that causes people to start not being at their best?
So you're talking about working with founders and CEOs that
Yeah,
maybe aren't
exactly.
as
That rightly so, should have respect and have built a wicked company, but they haven't gone through the process of becoming a leader and learning some of those hard-learned lessons about the impact on people
yeah
of not leading with
yeah.
empathy.
It's a great question. I think what and I'm humble enough to admit that my I think my failure runs up and down.
Hmm.
So it's I would tell you, for the longest time, I did not appreciate the kind of pressure that founders were under. I will tell you that, because I'd never been in their shoes. I used to joke, just because you've got a founder or CEO title beside your name does not mean you know shit. I've learned that, right? But they're human too. They're learning too. And they're under enormous pressure, especially as soon as that funding kicks in, right? And they've got a
Yeah.
VC at the table now. It's a lot of pressure. And I really I didn't understand that. I really didn't. And I have a much, much greater appreciation for that. Having started my own business as well, I understand what that kind of pressure is like, and it can be debilitating. And so I think I think it's important to understand that. I also think it's important to understand, if you're working with a first-time founder, that that pressure is far more enormous than it is with a repeat founder. Um, there are people in my role, and CMOs and CCOs, who will not work with first-time founders for that very reason, because it's hard. They don't always manage the pressure well. But I'm empathetic to that. It's tough. So I do think it starts with understanding the kind of pressure that they're under, first of all, and exercising empathy and patience, right? And working with them as a team to try to figure it out, versus what sometimes happens. Johnny doesn't know shit, and then you start to get these camps developing within the company. You get lots of, it just doesn't become siloism at that point. It becomes political, and that usually never ends well. So to me, it's like when you're managing a rep, it's the very same. You need to manage, up as well, and understand and just empathize with what they're going through. And I do believe, in my experience, if you exercise understanding and compassion and empathy, and you're focused on not only the right goals, but they need to be shared as well, right? So this is where this misalignment happens a lot in the revenue team, which is a CRO. I'm there to manage, is like, marketing. It's always fun to pick on marketing, right? I love marketing people, but I love to pick on them too. It's like, hey, I got 1,000 Facebook likes, and the salesperson, that's really great. I don't think the bank will accept Facebook likes, against my quota.
Yeah.
Well, what are you talking about? Making sure that you've got shared mutual goals will all work, and I just met with a customer success person the other day, relatively junior too, and she said something that stuck with me, and very mature, by the way. I wouldn't have said this had I been at the same stage. She said, "We win and lose as a team, period." So if my churn is like below 10%, but we didn't hit the number, we've all failed. And I'm like, that's a very, very mature thing to say, but it's true. You have to win, or it doesn't mean that you don't have your individual responsibilities, but it's important to have those shared goals, and it's important to, you know, work towards them as a team. And I think to your question, Richard, about founder, it's also, it's the human side, right? It's understanding that they're under enormous pressure, and, helping assume that a little bit, like, helping them out with their role in terms of, just trying to help take that pressure off, and achieve the number, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So hopefully that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Definitely.
I think it's also why founders want to hire people who have got the track record, right? Because it's the same thing for them. Do they want to work with a first-time sales leader and promote from within when they can actually get someone who does understand and have empathy for their situation, and probably add a lot of value to the business because they're bringing in a perspective and a way of looking at things that they might have a blind spot over. And I think that if you're hiring that senior leadership team, identifying that need that you have to fill a gap, to build the right culture and build the right, process in your business, I think it takes a lot. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
wisdom.
I do believe that, and I think you bring up a good point, but I'm seeing this a lot now, where, like, I think some folks are over indexing on certain things and under indexing on others. So to me, all the cultural stuff, I mean, people call it soft. It's not. There's nothing soft about it. That culture is the glue that keeps people together. It's the oil that greases the wheels of the machine to make it run smoothly. Without that, I don't care how good your product is, you're going to fall apart. And I've seen lots of companies with great products and poor go-to-market execution, strategy and execution fall apart. And I've also seen, what I would call B plus graded products do exceptionally well, because the go-to-market, it it just purred when it got executed, right? And so, mind you, not forever, but that's another subject for another day. So I think, I'm seeing a lot of over indexing on, do you have industry experience? I think it's important to say, have you been through this journey before? I agree with that. I think it's very, because, the CRO at a maybe 10 to 20 million probably isn't going to be your CRO from, 100 million to whatever, 500 million. They're very different skill sets. The KPIs are different. All sorts of things kick in that, it's just tough. So I guess what I'm talking more about is industry, over indexing on industry. And I think, not to pick on private equity, but from my experience and what I've heard, is private equity tends to over index on industry experience. Here's the problem that I have with that. If you want fresh thinking,
Yeah.
you're not going to get it from the person who's been in the insurance industry for 30 years. You're not, because they've been running around the same track with blinders on, and they don't even know what they don't know anymore. It's really, really difficult to get creative. It's really difficult to see your blind spots. And so when you start doing that, I think you're not necessarily going to see the success that you want, because you're not getting fresh ideas. And having been a fractional CRO, I've worked with agri-tech before. I think I've been on a farm twice in my life. But the problem they were trying to solve was the exact same problem that we were trying to solve at another company. Basically, that we sold to, like, janitorial services companies. Janitorial services in agriculture, they're not the same industry, but the problem
Hmm.
they're looking to solve was
Hmm.
the same. And so, when I talked to the founder of the agricultural company, you know, they literally said, "Hey, you're one of the only people I've spoken to that really understands what we're trying to do here." And I joked and I said, "Yeah, I'm not even from your industry." She goes, "Yeah, that's hilarious, right?" And she's a third generation apple farmer in upstate New York. So I think sometimes, I think I think it's good to bring people in from the outside that don't have that industry experience if you want that fresh thinking. I do think it's important to bring people in that have been through that journey and that particular, whether it's 1 to 10, 10 to 30, whatever. I think that's important too, but I wouldn't over index on industry experience.
So Remy, you mentioned around, having people that have done it before, been in that stage before, and you've taken a few companies, past that 25 million stage. What is it that you've seen that's repeatable and that is common across those things that you've seen for over time?
So you guys know, I mean, getting from 0 to 1 is it's brutal, right? That's an absolute grind. That's an experimentation phase. That's where you're throwing, you know what, against the wall constantly. And it's about speed, it's about experimentation, iteration. You're just constantly, you really don't have product market fit at that stage. You're in that problem market fit. You're like,
Uh,
here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's how I think our solution can solve it. And you're just out there and you just, pitch, 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 listen, 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 iterate, pivot, pivot, pivot. It's just, that's constantly it. And so you really need, I mean, in that stage, the founding team is just really, really important. Look, I think it's more important in that stage than almost any other stage. People really need to believe in what you're doing because they're not coming for the money, right? They're there because they genuinely believe what you're doing is going to make like a big impact. And so and I think it's also the reason why sometimes those folks they don't translate as the company gets bigger, right? It feels less family-ish, familiar. And so they don't um that sense of purpose starts to fade for them a little bit. But in the beginning, I think it's important that you've got, and sometimes you see founders too early hire VPs of sales when they
yeah.
should be hiring account executives and and they should be leading the sales efforts. And I can tell you that I've seen that happen more times than one where I've literally been sitting with the founder and they say, "Well, I don't really want to do the sales thing anymore. Like I want to outsource that." And I'm like, "But why?" "Well, I've got to do all this other stuff." I'm like, "No, you don't. No, you don't. You've got this is what we need to focus on now, which is getting all the market feedback
Hmm.
to go into, product development, to go into refining our messaging, understanding what go-to-market motion is, it inbound, outbound, partner-led, PLG, whatever, understanding. And when you outsource that, you're giving away the keys to the kingdom, quite frankly. That's a really, really short-sighted move. And so I've had these conversations with people. You also have founders sometimes in this stage who hang on to it too much and they don't want, so they'll hire a VP of sales and then that knowledge transfer, we used to call it the Vulcan mind melt, doesn't happen or doesn't happen enough. And,
Yeah.
the VP of sales is left sitting there and trying to figure it out on their own, which can be really, it's not going to be as effective if you don't have the founder working with that sales leader to try to just get everything out of their brain so they kind of operationalize it and operationalize it quicker. And so, yeah, that 0 to 1 is really, really hard. And then, your 1 to 10 is, that's different altogether. I mean, you're you start to introduce efficiency metrics at that stage. It's not just about can we grow, it's can we grow efficiently. And so they start looking at other the unit economics start to kick in. They start to look at CAC and LTV and payback period and things like that, which in those early stages, it's about number of meetings, whatever, cost per click. If you're doing, it's about, that kind of, the really, really raw sales metrics, marketing metrics. And so, yeah, I've been, at the company I mentioned, InView, that's no longer around. That was very raw. But I saw it, go from the 1 to 23, and there's a lot of things that happened in those stages, right? There's a lot. And then I work for big companies like Bureau Veritas, which I went there in that was a bit of an outlier for me. It was out of the tech industry. It was in the services industry. It's a very legacy industry. They do testing, inspection, and certification, but they do it for a lot of different industries. And I worked for a 100-year-old French company that was trying to, they hired a new CEO in North America and they wanted to transition from, I'll call it very engineering-led, reactive go to market to something that was much more sales and marketing, commercially led, proactive. And so I was brought in as the very first chief revenue officer, chief sales officer, and really was responsible for what it was really the biggest change management project that I had. And this is almost $700 million company with almost 7,800 employees, and had acquired 15 or 16 companies over the last decade. So it was the most complicated organization that I had ever worked for. But I loved the challenge because the CEO's like, look, I'm from the staffing industry, 25 years. I want to come in and I want to change the culture of this company. That's a huge undertaking. But by implementing, so what I ended up doing was, working on pockets of the business because you can't eat the elephant all at once. And we started working on the areas where I figured we could get a bigger return quicker by just making small tweaks. And interestingly enough, just doing making a lot of the same moves that I made at a $10 million company in a $650 million company. So introducing Salesforce, right? And they actually had 11 instances of Salesforce and 3 CRMs. So we got rid of a lot of that tech debt and brought it down to two CRMs, hired a Salesforce administrator, brought in RevOps person as well, because the company had an enormous database that was not being leveraged at all. And so I brought that person in and he was an absolute wizard. We used Tableau and Salesforce. And then it was really, going back to the basics and understanding. And I started off in oil and gas, understanding here are the markets that we serve, right? Here's our TAM, SAM, SOM, understanding our ICP and understanding how we were going to market, who the buyer personas were, who are the folks on the existing team. Do those match up? Because if you're doing a deal in oil and gas and upstream, it's a far different sales cycle than downstream. They're just completely different industries. And so it was doing all that basic work. And I think it's the reason why, particularly the data is we found pockets of opportunity to upsell and cross-sell our existing clients across business lines that we didn't do before. And I don't even think people were aware because the company was so segmented. Some parts of the company still operated, or they called themselves they referred to them as the brand that they were acquired under, and it had been years since they had acquired. So, changing that culture, and we grew the sales by 240 million in less than 3 years, I think, by just sticking to those basics. And a lot of it was data driven and sticking to, who's our buyer? What's our market? How big is that market? Do we have the right people on the team? Right. And so I think that's how we were able to grow so quickly.
What was next after this massive company that you worked at, where you increased the revenue by 240 million? What
Yeah.
happened next?
So after that, I ended up I wanted to go almost opposite, and go back to a small SaaS or software company, tech industry. So I went to a company in the fintech industry that was about 5.5 million. And they were really struggling to get their revenue above that mark. They were sort of hovering there. Their chief commercial officer, as they called it, had left. They were an industry, fintech industry veteran, a lot of great contacts, but were really stuck. And I think what they were trying to do was they had two products. One product was very much beyond product market fit. It wasn't about, hey, am I going to buy this? It's like, what flavor am I going to buy? And the other product that they had that the founders were really excited about was, it was more or less a data aggregation tool. So when you think about, and they sold into big Wall Street companies, right? Or, and we had offices in London too, but the financial services industry and all the heavyweights there, um, they sold a data aggregation. So when an institutional trader makes a trade, you've seen these screens. Some of them have upwards of like 10, 20, I think 34 is the record, screens that they're looking at before they're making these big institutional trades, which of course are they're millions of dollars. And so they need to look at all these data points, you know, digest them all really quickly to make a trading decision. And none of those screens work together. So they're, I don't even know how they did it, quite honestly. So, but this product really took all that information down to one screen. The data interacted with each other. And so the value proposition was literally, we help your institutional traders not make stupid multi-million-dollar trade mistakes. But that was a new product. That was very much like, we had a few customers, so it wasn't even in a product market fit stage. The issue was they were going at the go to market was, they were trying to get one team to sell both, and they were one was $100,000 sale that took 9 to 12 months. The other one was a 30 to 45 day sale that was worth about $27K, and they had everyone going after everything. And so what I immediately did was bifurcate the company into two. And we created separate teams, separate strategies, separate structures, separate playbooks, right? And separate data for them to go after each of their respective markets. And within 12 months, we doubled the revenue. It really all came down to one thing, and that's focus. It was focus. And so I always found it interesting that the product, the engineering, all the other functions, they were already divided, right? You can't have a product team like seriously working on two products. There needs to be some sort of specialization there. And so, but the go to market, they thought, we'll just have everybody go after everything, and they were really failing pretty miserably. So I ended up hiring a leader for the one product. I ended up promoting somebody who had really, really deep relationships on Wall Street, because you needed those, because at that point you're really pitching an idea. You productized it, but it's really an idea. It's like, so, hey, this is Phil from XYZ. We've got this great product. We think it can help you do this. I've known you for 25 years. You're the managing director at Morgan Stanley. Can we sit down, and I'll tell you about it and how I think it might be able to benefit you. That's a very senior, that's a different profile than someone over here that's selling that $27,000 product. So once we did that, we took the emergency brake off the car, and we ended up producing $1 million quarter. It was the first time they'd ever done that.
Wow. What's been your greatest success story?
Oh, Richard, that's so hard. Greatest success story. We're going to make this professional, right? Not personal. My greatest success story. I'd have to say, it's so hard to say, because I feel like as I started off, I took the road less traveled. Just because people always told me, at least when I started, they're like, get into one industry, really get deep, know that industry inside and out. And in my head, I'm like, man, that sounds like a fucking bore. I don't want to do that. I'm naturally, so I want to learn about different companies, different industries, different stages. Like, I really wanted to break all the rules people told me. I'm like, I'm not going to stay in the same industry. I'm not going to stay in the same size company. I'm not only going to work in startups. I'm going to go work for public companies. I'm going to go work for privately owned companies that are French owned, and they're 100 years, which is, we could have a whole conversation about that, right? These are not easy. I'm going to move to the United States, handle everything myself. Like, I did that on purpose. So it's so hard when I look at what stands out the most. I'm like, it's really hard for me to pick one, because I feel like by design, I chose hard. I chose hard. Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't always the right choice. I think Maybe there were some things I would have done a little bit differently, but not much. So it's hard for me to choose just one. I think if I had to pick one, I would probably pick the one that no one expected me to do, was to move from a successful HR tech company where I was incredibly bored, and I moved to a non-technical company that was 100 years old, and they wanted me to go in there and change culture in a very aggressive time frame. That was probably the most complex, most challenging change management exercise that I've ever done, and we really did well there. Yeah, and it was harder than hell. Like, it was really hard. I felt like I never worked harder in my life than when I worked there. But that was, and to me, that was like I was swimming upstream big time, and that's okay, because yeah, I like picking, I like hard.
Yeah. I like it. I like it. What I think would be really interesting to understand is you are an entrepreneur, right? You've worked in these businesses from 0 to like 24 million. I know you've done this a few times now. You've also mentioned that you started a business, and I know you've obviously been a fractional CRO. Talk us through that journey that you went on from being an entrepreneur to being an entrepreneur, and what you learned.
Yeah, what's interesting is the average tenure of a CRO in the United States is about 17 months now. Some people say 17, some people say 18. Look, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I do think part of it is because in certain situations, if you're doing a really, really, really good job, it's almost like, I don't want to say it runs on autopilot, but there's not as much for you to do. Now, it depends on the size of the company, it depends on the industry, the complexity of the product and things like that. But for me, I always got things to a point where the engine purred and it ran really, really well. And so the last company that I was with, and it went, the timing was interesting because it was around 2022, which of course we all know that, the tech industry really started to take a nosedive. The end of ZERP, there's no more zero interest rate policy anymore. Money's now expensive, and things changed very, very quickly. And so capital dried up. They went a different direction. Great. Okay. And then, so I after spending some time golfing and hanging out with my son, playing Uber driver with his extracurricular activities, I really wanted to go out on my own. And because I thought it would be really cool to do what I love doing, which is choose hard and continuously learn about new businesses and new industries. And I've got the more I for some reason, I have a really, really good ability to cut through the noise and make sense of chaos really quickly. And so for me, being able to walk into a company and know in a relatively short order what's going on, by looking at their strategy, structure, right? Processes, people, and there's a whole framework that I use there, understanding those things. Um, I can quite easily pinpoint what's going on and start to make some changes, and that's something I really, really enjoy doing. And it's why I wanted to do it on a fractional basis, because you get to do that with a lot of different companies. And so that's why I decided, hey, I'm gonna go out on my own, and I'm gonna do this.
And I guess I knew there was probably a whole new podcast on that topic, but one of the things you talked about is the people. It's one of the things that you look at, right? Just because I think obviously we are, recruitment business, that would be a really interesting topic to understand in a bit more detail, your approach. When you're thinking about looking at the people, what's the lens that you're looking through, and talk us through how you do that?
Yeah, so I always start with the actual person. It's all the things you can't change, or you know, you can change, but I don't have 20 years and a psychology degree to do it, right? It's more, and it's a very old word, but I like it. It's more, I think it's character, right?
Mm.
Character. People used to use that word a lot, character. Now that, it's authenticity, things like that. So do they have a great work ethic? Are they intelligent? Are they, are they trustworthy? And when I mean trustworthy, I define that very much like Stephen Covey defined it. There's two elements of trust. There's, are you a good person? Do you tell me the truth? Do you live up to your expectations? Do you do what you say you're going to do? And then the other component of that trust is, um, do you know what you're doing? Like, do you have the skills, the knowledge, and whatnot? I I always focus on the first element of trust first, because you look, it's a lot easier to correct a young tree than it is to correct an old one. And so I want, you need someone with all those things. And I found that when it comes to hiring, people have that flipped. They're looking at, well, do they have the right experience? Do they have the right, pedigree? Did they go to the right schools? Did they? And I'm like, for me, that's backwards. I think you need to look at the person first. And and I remember hiring a person, when I was at Career Builder, I started Career Builder in Canada. So this was the very first international office that we started. And and so I opened up the office. I was employee number one. We ended up getting up to just under, well, about 30 employees, somewhere around there. We went from 0 to 10 million in 3 years, which was big. I mean, that was big. Canada's not a big market, right? It's about the size of California. 10 million is a big deal. We were up against a very entrenched competitor owned by the biggest media companies there. It was tough. That was also a lot of fun. And I remember when we started to hire enterprise reps, and a gentleman came into my office, interviewed very, very well. I was going to hire him. He called me a day later and he said, I wanted to tell you that I wasn't completely forthright and honest on my resume. It looked like I had a degree. I never finished it. And I wanted to be honest with you, and I wanted to tell you. So, being somewhat of a young leader, I'm like, okay, I appreciate you calling, let me noodle it through. And I thought about it, and I'm like, he made a mistake, right? He made a mistake, but he owned up to it. And I ended up hiring him, and he ended up being like one of the President's Club winners and one of the highest before he
Right.
actually got Rep of the Year. And I'm like, that just goes to show you, right? And that was a big leadership lesson for me. And I always like to say I did that by accident, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to give him a shot, but I'm still a little bit unsure. But the
Yeah.
fact that he owned up to that, that misstep is that rings a lot with me. So to me, it's that integrity, it's that work ethic, it's the honesty, it's that always rings true. And I just feel like a lot of people, they do it backwards, and I think that's wrong.
100%.
Yeah. Not to say those things don't matter, because I believe, you do need to have the experience to a degree. You need to have whatever educational credentials you need, experience and things like that. That's very, very helpful. And I know, especially now where, the stakes are a lot higher to be successful a lot faster, but you can't make a good deal with a bad person.
Huh.
And so that's what I look at first.
What's next then, Remy? So if we think about what you would love this next chapter of your career to look like,
Yeah.
what's in your mind?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I've, and Richard, I think you and I talked about this in our initial conversation, right? Throughout the years, my father was an Italian, he's an Italian immigrant. He came here, it's the classic story, 60 cents in his pocket, borrowed suitcase, wearing the only suit he owned. That stuff's real. Like that was him. And he, was a laborer, then an electrician, then became like a master electrician, then opened his own company, um, doing residential and commercial. And then he actually partnered with someone, and they started building huge luxury homes, massive, beautiful homes. And so, that entrepreneurship's definitely in my blood, and so is real estate. And so when I was young, my father's, I started just asking him about wealth building and things like that. And of course, in his Italian, he says, Remy, he goes, it's really easy. He says, you take the money you will make and you put it into other things that make them more money. It's that simple. And I'm like, okay. So I just started buying real estate and I'm fascinated with it. And I still am. And so, today I own multifamily properties around the country. I still own some stuff in Canada and I love real estate. And so for me, I would really love to get into, where you can combine, sort of marry, if technology and real estate, got together and made a baby, it would be some sort of prop tech company. And I think that industry has a lot of promise. And I think it's ripe. It's one of those industries that's ripe for disruption, which I love. I love going in there and challenging these old established norms and the way things have been doing. You run into people a lot where it's like, well, we've been doing it that way for 100 years. I'm like, man, not anymore. So so for me, that prop tech industry really combines the best of both worlds, that real estate and that technology. And the fact it's ripe for disruption gives, shit disturbers like me a lot to chew on.
I love it. It makes sense. I think if you can combine your passion with your
Really?
profession, then that's like the dream come true, right? I guess what would be the characteristics of a company, or what would you need to see in a company to get really excited about them?
Yeah, I think for me, at this stage in the game, I think they need to have some sort of product market fit, right? So, um, and it, but early enough that there's still a lot
Mm.
of work to do in terms of coming in there, maybe they've got a few AEs that are doing well. The CEO or the founder is still involved in some of the commercial activity, the sales activity, and now they need to be a CEO, do CEO stuff, right? And they need a VP of sales or a CRO to come in there and make sure that the revenue team, marketing, sales, client success, right, are aligned, and you've got the right strategy, structure, processes, and the right team in place to take this thing from, call it 10 million to 50 million. That to me, that's a total buzz, man. That is awesome. That's what I love doing. Putting in all that structure and obviously not over engineering it too, because I've seen a lot of over engineering, especially with rev ops. This is I think it's important that you don't over engineer things, but having those systems in place that you can rinse and repeat, you really do need that if you're gonna scale and get bigger. And that's what I've done in my history. That's what I love doing, and yeah, that's where I get my kicks, man.
Love it. I love it.
So our closing tradition, Remy, is to do TickFire questions. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, great. What was the best advice you've ever got?
Best advice I've ever gotten. I think it's what I said. I think it's, be hard on the numbers and easy on people. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Best advice I ever got.
Mm.
Yeah. Took
What
me
was the
10 years to realize it, but I got it. Yeah.
But it's like a seed that grows, so it's
Right.
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of good things grow out of shit.
That might be the best advice I've ever got. What's the hardest lesson you've had to learn?
Hardest?
Mhm.
Knowing when to say no. Yeah. Knowing when to say no to a promotion, knowing when to say no to a company that doesn't fit, even though the money is really good. The stock options are very, very, the equities, learning to say no. That's
Hmm.
hard. Yeah.
How do you want to be remembered by the people that you've worked with?
Yeah. So I want to, someone who always took the time to help people, who was generous, not just with material things, but with their time. And I think time is incredibly important. As you get older, you realize, man, wow, that truly is the only non-renewable resource. And time, the giving of time is the ultimate gift. And I want to be remembered for someone who took the time to spend with someone who was maybe having a bad day, was frustrated, going through a tough time. I'd like to be that. So generous with their time. That's how I want to be remembered.
I love that. I love that. Remy, thank you so much for being on What Makes You Tick. This has been an amazing conversation, and I know it will help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we will see you on the next episode.